But before we get into all of that, there is something that I don't know if everybody else noticed it, but I noticed it almost immediately. Now, there's been this little question getting circulated around the Democratic Party and its members who are running for president. Kamala Harris has been addressed with this question pretty frequently. Elizabeth Warren has been addressed with this question pretty frequently. And it's also been used against Bernie Sanders. This question about reparations. Did anybody else notice that question was missing this town hall meeting? Because if you were like myself, I know you were waiting for it. I'm sure there were a good amount of black people who were voting based off of who's best for black candidate or black people in general. I'm pretty sure they were waiting for it too. I was waiting for it because I was curious to hear her answer about it, because she has a great record when it comes to the conversation of reparations. You never got the question, which is interesting because Tulsi actually planned on discussing this at length this weekend, because Chris Bellick, appreciate the super chat. Tulsi planned on discussing this at length this weekend because she is actually for the study of reparation, is actually for reparations, and she wants to go in depth with that conversation. She actually co-sponsored, the Conyers bill that was recently rejuvenated. And so her name is on the dotted line for not only the study of reparations, but creating a committee specifically to address reparations, and then to figure out what the best way to pursue reparations would be. And then she would be for, of course, signing the bill that would enact reparations in whatever form that may take. So isn't it interesting that Kamala gets asked, because she doesn't have any way to quote unquote prove it outside of introducing reparation legislation right now. And she says, oh, yeah, sure, whatever. Elizabeth Warren gets asked, yeah, I'm for propping up the black community. Yeah, no, you're not. Once again, none of them really specifically address what they're talking about when it comes to reparations. And really, this isn't even a conversation for or against reparations, but what I'm trying to help people realize is how that conversation was being used to divide. And even its dismissal in the middle of this particular town hall, it should still raise flags for those of you who are trying to use the reparations conversation per se to say whether or not you absolutely will or absolutely will not support a candidate. I've seen people use reparations against Bernie, saying because he isn't specifically for handing out checks, that they won't vote for him at all. But then other people will say, well, why wouldn't Bernie do it if Kamala and Elizabeth are doing it? But that's not what Kamala and Elizabeth Warren are talking about. So it needs to be understood that it's a tactic being used to divide. How do we know this? Because Tulsi has already drawn a line in the sand when it comes to reparations. She put her name on the dotted line already. So why not answer the question? I think that the people would like to know that, don't you think? That's what I would think. Interesting to me how they had multiple black people and brown people asking Bernie Sanders questions about him being white. Are you for reparations? Trying to corner him into basically exploiting his whiteness, I guess is what you would say. They were trying to get him to exploit his own whiteness. Or they were trying to exploit his whiteness by getting him to expose his own whiteness, quote unquote. But with Tulsi, it was the opposite, right? There was like no black people in the crowd. And the ones who were in the crowd, I think there might have been one question from a black person, but they didn't ask her about what steps she plans on taking for the black community. They didn't ask her about what steps she has already taken for the black community. They didn't ask her where she stood on black issues. They didn't ask her where she stood on prison industrial reform. They did ask about the war on drugs, but they had a white woman come up and ask her about it, despite the fact that the war on drugs we know has disproportionately affected black people specifically. But once again, that is not a coincidence. So it needs to be understood when people are using our struggles, our conversations, just the black reality, And they're trying to weaponize it against candidates who would benefit us. Maybe one candidate would benefit us more than the other, but I do believe right now there are no two candidates that will benefit us more than Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders. I know this for a fact, especially with Tulsi, because specifically, you have to understand, people. I don't even know how the black agenda is extremely important to Tulsi. It is. She expressed this to me personally. She was excited about answering a question about reparations tonight. She was. The problem was CNN knew for a fact that if she answers that question the way I know she was going to, when she looks at that camera and says, I don't know what Kamala Harris is talking about, I don't know what Elizabeth Warren is talking about, but I know what I did. I put my name on that dotted line. I co-sponsored a bill, or a resolution, excuse me, to address reparations. For black people. This isn't like affirmative action, quote unquote, for minority. This is for black people. So strategically, when we're talking about demographics and how they affect the outcome of Democratic primaries, think about this way. What did they do last year to Bernie Sanders, or last election to Bernie Sanders? They stopped black people from being able to come into any type of contact with him, and by extension, the policies that would benefit black people as a whole. It wouldn't fix all the problems, but it will ultimately benefit us. So they knew that if black people heard she's the only one in the entire race right now that is co-sponsored, reparations legislation, all hell's breaking loose. All the black votes are going to go to her. It would have been over. And at a CNN town hall, once again, this is what systemic racism looks like. Don't let black people know that there is somebody who's actively fighting for them. Don't let them know that. Because then they won't be bamboozled into voting for the Kamala Harrises of the world, the Cory Bookers of the world. That is what systemic racism looks like. When not only do they hold us back through various institutions, but they even try to censor the information our community needs because we're too busy trying to pay bills and make ends meet. And so for them to disallow her the privilege of boldly and proudly saying, this is exactly what I plan on doing for the black community, was very disingenuous of them. But it wasn't done by accident. It was done on purpose, and it was done in bad faith. Not one question about the black community was answered to Tulsi Gabbard because, unlike everyone else, once again, she signed on the dotted line. Thank you for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. Help us reach our goal of 500 patrons. You can do so by donating as little as $1 by clicking on the Patreon link in the description below. Don't forget, join us on Roku and JustNForm. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. And remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.